Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I sure appreciate you stopping by the channel. Today, I have an almost unbelievable story for you about a gruesome attack and an incredible survivor, a survivor who has done miraculous things with the second chance she's been given at life. Here in the Dark Hearts community, we do not shy away from the conversation about cops, good cops and bad cops. We praise the police when they do great work, and we criticize the police when they do bad work. With great power comes great responsibility, and sadly, our police sometimes fall short. The woman at the heart of today's story is going to make you feel all the feels. You're going to be sad for her, you're going to be angry at her, and you're going to be proud of her. This is the story of Katrina Brown Lee, bad cop versus good cop. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's get into it. Our story begins on a cold January day in Long Island, New York. 22-year-old Katrina Brown Lee is at home. Well, she is in her house. You couldn't really call it a home. She lived with her fiancé, Irvin, who worked as a New York City corrections officer at Rikers Island. The couple had a daughter together, and Katrina also had an older daughter from a previous relationship. Katrina and Alex were toxic together. The relationship was abusive, and when I say abusive, Katrina's nickname became Shades. Why? Because she was never seen without her sunglasses. She used them to hide her ever-present black eyes. She said she never went anywhere without those sunglasses. Didn't matter if it was the left or the right. Katrina always had a black eye. She had split lips that she explained away as cold sores. She had bruises that she hid with long sleeves. Her house, like I say, was not a home. As Katrina describes it, it was a house of horrors. After years of abuse, Katrina made up her mind she had had enough and she was leaving. She told Alex it was over between them and he went to work. Katrina took her kids and their things and she moved into a cheap motel. We're going to get into all of the details, but one day Alex lured Katrina back to the house. She walked in the house and she turned around and Alex was standing in the doorway and he had this weird look on his face. Alex said to Katrina, "Today is the day you're gonna die, bitch." He then raised a gun and shot Katrina in the stomach. He shot her again and again and again. He emptied the magazine, putting the 5 shells here in this ashtray on the family coffee table. He then reloaded the gun with these bullets. Katrina lay here on the floor of the house, bleeding from her wounds, unable to move, and she was beginning to lose consciousness. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. The next thing Katrina knew, she was being scooped up off the bathroom floor, and Alex stopped shooting. Katrina then became aware that she was being taken outside and loaded into a car. She heard 2 voices. Katrina was in and out of consciousness, but she remembers looking up and seeing the sign to Brookhaven Memorial Hospital on Long Island. One of the men went inside the hospital, grabbed a wheelchair, and wheeled it up next to the car. He then dragged Katrina from the back seat, threw her into the wheelchair, and pushed it into the emergency room at the hospital. The guy left her there, then ran back to the car and sped off. Katrina was barely conscious. In fact, she was barely alive, but she managed to tell the doctors what happened to her, and she told them who had shot her. Detectives were called to the hospital and informed of what was going on. They immediately raced to the couple's house. The police walked up onto the porch, and Irvin calmly opened the front door and said, "I was expecting you." Irvin was taken into custody, and these photos were taken of him. CSI units arrived on the scene and snapped photos of the inside of the house. As you can see here, there is evidence of a struggle throughout. There is blood in the bathroom. There is blood on the floor. There is blood on the toilet. There is blood here in the laundry area, even on the dirty clothes on the floor. And there is blood in the living room. Katrina had done everything she could to try and get away from her attacker, and the result was a very bloody and disturbing crime scene. Back at the hospital, a young attorney from the DA's office named Carrie Herzog was summoned to take a dying declaration from Katrina Brown Lee. The doctors did not expect Katrina to survive, and they are trained to call in the prosecutors when there's a violent struggle that's going to lead to a death, so that those prosecutors can get a dying declaration. Carrie Herzog arrived at the hospital, and the doctor said, there's been too much blood loss. She's not going to make it. Carrie Herzog got her tape recorder out and prepared to take Katrina Brown Lee's dying declaration, her last statement. Carrie said Katrina's voice was just more than a whisper. As Katrina talked, Carrie felt that this witness was in her last moments of life, and she knew she needed this evidence to take to a grand jury if there would ever be hope of getting justice for what had been done to this woman. Katrina confirmed what she had already told the doctors. Her ex-fiance that she'd broken up with a couple of weeks earlier had lured her back to the house they shared and shot her again and again. When Carrie Herzog left the hospital after taking Katrina's statement, she was sure she would never see the young woman alive again. But Carrie Herzog was wrong. Katrina Brown Lee survived, but she had a long way to go before she would be free of this incident. Katrina grew up in poverty. She became pregnant as a teenager, and when she was just 19, she met Alex Irvin. He was good to her, and he was good to Katrina's baby girl. Katrina said that she saw Alex as a way out. He had a job, a good job, he had a car, and to her, he looked like a way out of the projects. Katrina thought she had met someone nice, and she was going to be able to escape her very difficult life. Instead, it was pretty much the beginning of a nightmare. Just weeks into the relationship, Alex turned violent. Katrina went to her grandmother and asked her grandmother, "What should I do?" And her grandmother told her, "Stay with Alex," for the very same reasons that Katrina had already stated. He was a way out. Katrina would later say that the advice she got from her grandmother was the worst advice she ever had. It's hard to judge people, though, when you haven't been in their position. When you grow up in that kind of poverty, you're looking for a way out. The beatings continued. Katrina says Alex would beat her over anything, what she was wearing, what she said, if the baby was crying, and then Katrina became pregnant again. So Katrina had her older daughter from a previous relationship. Katrina and Alex had one daughter together, and then Katrina was pregnant for a third time. As the abuse continued and even got worse, Katrina began to call 911. The very first time Katrina ever called 911, the cops showed up, and Katrina was in for a real eye-opener. The police officers that responded to the call knocked on the front door of the home. Alex opened the door and flashed his badge at the cops, and they turned around and walked away. There's been some things in the news lately that have motivated me to want to bring you this older story. We've got issues, and we need to talk about the thin blue line. Later in the episode, we are going to go into some statistics about police officers and domestic abuse and violence, and the way other cops treat the police officers that they know are violent, because it is a real problem and it should make us all angry. After Katrina called 911 that first time and the cops turned around and walked away without even interviewing her, they didn't even ask her who had called 911. They didn't ask her a single question. As soon as they saw that it was a cop involved, even though he was a corrections officer in the prison and not like a street cop, it doesn't matter. I mean, cops are literally in a fraternity, right? Like here in our town, it's the fraternal order of, whatever, they're by number. They see each other as brothers, and even the female cops feel a little a little bit on the outside. This did not stop Katrina from calling 911 a couple of other times. She thought, maybe if I keep calling and there's a record of the beatings, they'll do something. Well, they didn't. Katrina then knew she was pretty much on her own. She had tried again and again. Each time she called the police, Alex flashed his own badge at them, and each time the cops turned and walked away without even talking to Katrina. She would later tell a reporter, "That badge meant more to those cops than my life did." That is not how this is supposed to work. That is not how any of this is supposed to work. So Alex and Katrina moved from Brooklyn to Long Island in 1992 after dating for about a year. In this more isolated neighborhood on Long Island, the abuse just got worse. But like I said, after 5 years, Katrina found the strength to say, this is it, and she broke off their engagement. She was actually pregnant with that third child when she broke off the engagement. When Katrina found out she was pregnant, that was the last straw. She told herself that she was going to end the cycle. She was not bringing a third child into the violent and dangerous atmosphere inside the home. Katrina packed her things, she packed the kids' things, and she moved into this motel. She stayed there for several weeks until there was no more money. You have to remember, Katrina did not have a family. She didn't have a mom. She didn't have a dad. She had this grandmother that was stuck in poverty herself. Katrina faced the problem that a lot of low-income single mothers face. She couldn't just go and get a job because childcare is so expensive that working doesn't even cover the cost of the childcare. It is just so crazy to me that America, which I do think is one of the greatest countries in the world, we are one of the few developed countries that does not have corporate childcare. It is just, we are so far behind some other countries. And it is amazing to me, with corporate profits being at an all-time high, like times 10 what they were even a few years ago, corporations are still not offering childcare. Any decent company should offer childcare. So Katrina couldn't go to work. She obviously couldn't leave the kids alone. They were too little. And as you are well aware, this is an impossible situation. There is no way to work anywhere for near minimum or low to minimum wages and pay for childcare. We've created a nightmare for women and for men that take care of children. So when the money started to run out, Katrina became desperate. She had no family that could help her, and her kids were hungry. She said one day she was just at the end of her rope and she was so desperate that she called Alex. Alex came to the motel, and Katrina reports that for the first time ever, she feels like they had a really good conversation. She felt like he listened to her, he apologized, he told her he would change, and he seemed to be softer. Katrina thought to herself, can this be real? But as the hours passed and they continued to talk, she became convinced he wanted her back, and he really wanted to make a go of it. This wake-up call, her leaving him, had changed something in him. Alex said, come home, let's make this work. And Katrina agreed to do that. She had no idea that she was walking right into a trap. Katrina left her oldest daughter with a woman that she'd become friends with at the motel, and she took the littlest one, and remember, she was pregnant, and the little one, Alex and Katrina, went back to the house that they had shared together on Long Island. Katrina and Alex walked into the house. Katrina was carrying the little girl. She went into the little girl's room and laid her down on her bed, and then she walked out into the living room, and that's when she saw Alex standing in the doorway with a weird look on his face. Like I said in the beginning, Alex lifted the gun and shot her. Katrina fell down on the sofa. You can see the sofa here, and you can actually see the bullet hole. Katrina says as she sat back on the sofa, she looked up at Alex and said, "Why am I not bleeding?" And Alex said, "Shut up." Katrina slid down off of the couch and began to crawl across the floor. Alex shot her in the arm. She continued to crawl, and Alex walked towards her and lifted his foot and kicked her in the face. Ugh. Katrina got to the phone to try and call 911, But Alex had prepared for this, and he had already ripped the phone cord out of the wall. Then Alex walked over to Katrina and picked her up. He carried her to their own bed and laid her down. You can see here on the mattress the blood that was left from Katrina laying on that bed. Katrina remembers she could feel herself slipping away as she lay there, looking up at the ceiling. Alex does something that I find to be very strange. He goes in the bathroom and he gets some Band-Aids, like Band-Aids that you would use for a scrape or a scratch. I don't know why I find that so strange. Is that just me? Or does that seem like such a strange thing to do? Covering bullet wounds with Band-Aids? It almost makes me wonder if this guy was on something. Or just, I don't know, maybe not very smart. Why would you try to cover a bullet wound with a Band-Aid? After she was laying on the bed for a little while, Alex picked Katrina up and carried her to the bathtub. You can see here in this photo where he placed her. She left quite a bit of blood in the bathtub, making a mess in the bathroom. Katrina would later say, "This man didn't just want to kill me. He wanted to torture me, and he did torture me." Over the course of 2 hours, Alex Irvin would empty his service weapon twice into Katrina. She was shot a total of 10 times. Alex thought he had planned this attack. It was actually an ambush. He thought he'd planned it out really well. He'd pulled the phones from the walls. He'd locked the doors and the windows so Katrina couldn't run. But there was no way for Alex to know that in the middle of the attack, one of his friends would stop by the house. As Katrina lay bleeding to death in the bathtub, she heard the knock at the door. Alex opened the front door of the house and let his friend inside the house. The moment the man walks inside, he's like, looking at something out of a horror film. Alex said, "Follow me." And he took his friend to the bathroom and shows him Katrina, who has crawled out of the bathtub and is lying face down, bleeding on the bathroom floor. This man, this friend of Alex's, says, "We got to get her to the hospital. She's going to die." So the two men load Katrina into Alex's car, and with the friend driving, they rushed her to the ER. Like I said earlier, Katrina was laying in the backseat bleeding and was going in and out of consciousness. It was Alex's friend who'd gone into the hospital, grabbed the wheelchair, loaded Katrina into it, and pushed her back inside. Had this friend not showed up when he did, Katrina Brown Lee would have died that day inside her house. There is not a doubt in my mind. Instead, she was rushed into surgery. A second surgery followed the next day when she surprised everyone by surviving. And then from there on out, it was a series of surgeries. Word got back to Carrie Herzog from the DA's office that Katrina was still alive, and Carrie couldn't believe it. Carrie would later say that it never even occurred to her that this young woman would survive this horrific ordeal. The doctors didn't think she would survive, and they told the DA, she's not going to make it. For days, Katrina would lay in the hospital going in and out of consciousness. When she was finally coherent, the first thing she wanted to know was, where are my daughters and how is the baby that I'm carrying? Katrina was told that her daughters were fine and they were being taken care of, but that the baby, a boy, had died due to her injuries. As if that wasn't devastating enough to hear, the injuries that Katrina suffered were such that she would never again have a child. It got worse for Katrina. Somehow, after losing a baby and being told you'll never have another one, it got worse. The doctor pulled up a chair and sat down by Katrina's bedside, and he said, "You are not going to be able to walk again." Katrina said that she heard the words the doctor was saying, but she couldn't process them. She said, "What do you mean?" And the doctor answered, "You're going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. You are going to need round-the-clock care for the rest of your life." And Katrina said, "That's not an option for me. I have no one. I don't even have a place to go. I'm homeless." Then everyone was kind of surprised because Alex Irvin's own mother stepped forward and told Katrina that she and the girls could move into her house, which was unoccupied at the time. So Katrina was discharged from the hospital, and she moved into a very small walk-up to live alone with these little girls when she was told she needed, all of this care. I mean, this is America. If you don't have really great insurance, you're not getting any care. It's something else that I find absolutely despicable. Faced with the overwhelming nature of her situation, Katrina Brown Lee fell into a deep, deep depression. She stopped doing physical therapy. She stopped trying to learn to speak again. She stopped caring whether she lived or died. One day, Katrina's physical therapist came for a visit, and he told Katrina, "I have a feeling that you're going to walk again." He told her, "I know you're going to walk again. I can feel it." Katrina said something changed on that day, and she believed it. I'm going to try to hold it together here. My personal life for the last 3 weeks has been really, really difficult. I'm not going to go into any details, but there have been days where I could not drag myself out of bed. I forced myself to work in the morning hours because I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. And then I would pace for hours back and forth thinking about these problems that I'm facing. And the nature of the problems is, I have no one to talk about this with. My husband, that's about it. My mom and dad have been really supportive, but I have not had a great summer. During my darkest days, I have come to YouTube to read your comments. And you guys have really been my only friends through this. Without knowing it, you have pulled me through some of the darkest days of the last 10 years of my life. You have no idea what your kind words and your support and just telling me how much you love me and how much you enjoy my work. I will never, ever, ever be able to thank you or to adequately tell you what it has meant to me. The things that are personal to me are deeply personal. And when something is deeply personal to me, no one knows about it, maybe my husband. It is a self-imposed prison. I understand that. But there is just something in me where I have to retreat. I have to be alone when things get really bad. And you guys have been the only positivity that I've had in my life besides a couple of other people. The point is this. You never know what a few words of kindness means to someone. You never ever know what someone is truly dealing with. You guys had no idea, and you never will, what you were doing for me, and you will never know what your kind words did for me in a really dark time. I'm hoping things are starting to look up, but it was just such an amazing reminder about how powerful a few words of kindness and support are to somebody. I hope along with this amazing story of survival, we take that lesson away from this. We need kind words now more than ever, I think. This physical therapist probably had no idea that him telling Katrina he had a feeling she would walk again would have that effect on her. The older I get, the less I know, but the more I am convinced a kind word to a stranger, to a friend, to a family member can work miracles. I am a kind person. I am not always a nice person, and there's a difference. Nice? I'm nice until I'm given a reason not to be nice. But I always try to be kind. I haven't always been this way. It is something that I have had to work on, but I just wanted to take a moment and share this with you because this story of Katrina's therapist giving her this hope to go on, it was just a few words, but it changed her life. A few kind words can literally change someone's life. Katrina Brown Lee started standing out of her wheelchair on her own. She was using a walker for a while, and that worked. And then she started to use a cane. Slowly but surely, she was getting her mobility back. And just when it all started to look up and feel a little more hopeful, the sky caved in again. Alex's mother came to Katrina and told her she wanted Katrina to write a statement saying that she had shot herself so Alex didn't go to prison. Katrina refused to do that, and so Alex's mother kicked Katrina out of her house. Katrina found herself barely recovered, barely able to walk, homeless, and on the streets with 2 little girls. The 3 of them moved into a rat-infested shelter that was so filthy, Katrina said she wouldn't use the bathrooms there. They would go to a gas station to wash up. This entire time, Alex Irvin had been locked up. Carrie Herzog had enough against him to keep him in jail, and she was building her case against Alex, getting ready to go to trial. One day, Carrie found out that Alex was breaking all of the rules, and he was calling Katrina from inside the prison, threatening her not to testify. Carrie Herzog said that when she found out that Alex had been threatening Katrina, she felt a white-hot rage, and she decided to rain hellfire with the heat of 1,000 suns, is what she said, onto Alex Irvin. Carrie said the arrogance of this man was more than she could bear. And then Carrie got this letter. The letter appeared to have been written by Katrina, stating that she would not testify against Alex, and that if they tried to force her to, she would say she shot herself. Carrie called Katrina, and Katrina said, "I'm not coming in. I'm not talking to you. In fact, I'm going to disappear, and you will never find me." Carrie said she let out a yell, like a guttural yell, and said, "I am going to hunt you down like a dog and make you help me put this man in prison." And then Katrina hung up on her. I told you were going to feel all the feelings, and one of those things is anger towards Katrina. But Carrie wasn't deterred. She was convinced that even without her star witness, she could get Alex in prison for the rest of his life. This crime was so heinous and so egregious, Carrie was determined to make a jury side with her. 3.5 months after the attack, the trial began. On the very first day, Carrie was in the middle of opening statements when the courtroom doors opened, and in walked Katrina Brown Lee. Carrie said she remembers gasping out loud. When Alex saw Katrina walk into the courtroom with a look of determination on her face, he knew it was all over for him. Several days later, Alex pled guilty to all charges. Carrie Herzog was actually angry that Alex took the plea deal. She wanted to prosecute him. She begged the judge for the maximum sentence. Instead, the judge issued the lightest sentence he could, 5 to 15 years. Carrie Herzog was furious. She said she went back to her office and kicked her garbage can across the office. She says she still has that garbage can with a huge dent in it to remind her of that day and the rage she felt at the injustice. Katrina and Carrie went their separate ways, but neither of them ever forgot how angry they were that the justice system had failed them both, and this cop had been let off with so little time. Something in Katrina Brown Lee began to fume. Something was building inside her, and something was changing. Katrina picks up the phone and calls her advocate and now friend Carrie Herzog to tell her that she has made a decision. Katrina has decided to attend the police academy and become a cop. Carrie says she was very stunned, but very, very proud to hear this. Katrina said she wanted to become what she needed and was denied, a good cop. Katrina went to police academy and became a graduate. She was sworn in to become a New York police officer. Just 2 months later, Katrina and her fellow graduates became first responders during 9/11. Just a year later, Alex Irvin was released from prison. Katrina Brown Lee said she threw herself into her work. She was working undercover as a street prostitute, adopting this cigar-smoking, drug-dealing, tough girl persona. As she worked undercover for a year, and then 2, and then 5, Katrina Brown Lee changed. She began forming relationships with the working girls, and she realized they were no different than her. She very easily could have become a drug-addicted prostitute. She realized she came from the same place those girls did, and that's when Katrina decided to become a community outreach officer. She was now working the streets and working within that community, but the entire time throughout Katrina's career, she was worried and she was keeping a secret. No one in Katrina's life knew what had happened to her. No one knew she was a domestic violence survivor. No one knew that she had survived an attempted murder. She was afraid that if people knew, they would think she was weak. She was afraid that if people knew, they would think she was unstable, that maybe she'd go off on a domestic abuser, cause problems for the department. So she kept it all bottled up inside of her. Can you imagine this? This woman brings herself out of this horrific situation and then has to live with shame for being a victim, with the shame of worrying someone is going to find out that she has survived. This is why we have to talk about these stories, my friends. This is why we must remove the stigma of victimhood. Katrina Brown Lee rose to the rank of detective. She received high honors, but she continued to keep that secret. In 2014, Katrina's career on the streets came to an end, and she became one of the first Black female officers assigned to protect the mayor of New York City. She became one of Mayor Bill de Blasio's advanced security team members. Katrina worked that job successfully for years. And then in 2021, she decided to retire. On her last day at work, she thought, I think it's time. Katrina sat with the mayor on her final day in his service, and she told him what had happened to her all those years ago in 1993 when she was just 22 years old, and the mayor could not believe his ears. They talked, and then they parted ways, and Katrina walked out of the mayor's mansion and wrote a book. Her book is called And Then Came the Blues, if you'd like to look it up. This little girl from the projects has become something she never dreamed of. She tells her story, and she has started her own foundation, Young Ladies of the Future. Katrina and her 2 daughters mentor other young girls in difficult situations. She's been doing this for 10 years now, and she has helped many young women. Katrina follows up with the girls she works with. She makes sure they get good grades, and she offers them the love that she never had. I am so impressed with Katrina. I think she's a hero. I think she's a miracle. I think she's a champion, and I know she's a queen. I want to keep the good vibes of this story going. Sometimes we need a few good vibes here. So I'm going to give you some numbers, but instead of feeling angry about these numbers, I want these numbers to inspire us. I want these numbers to inspire us to become the village we need to be. Let's take California. In 2019, an extensive study was done regarding police officers who are arrested for domestic violence. In a 6-month period, 84 cops were arrested for domestic violence-related charges, which included abusing wives, girlfriends, children, and their own parents. In the majority of these cases, a conviction in California would mean they no longer can carry a gun. Of the 84 arrests on serious charges, 32 of those cops pled down to nonviolent misdemeanors, meaning they get to keep their gun. Let's go a little deeper. Only 46 of these cases, these arrests of cops, were publicized in the media. Of the 46 that were publicized, only 2 cops kept their jobs, but 38 arrests of cops were not publicized. And of those not publicized, 10 of those cops kept their job. So what does this equate to? Transparency equals accountability. Secrecy equals a continuation of the cycle. Cops are 4 times more likely to commit domestic abuse than the general American population. 4 times. Domestic abuse at home and working as a police officer often go hand in hand. USA Today reports that in 44 states, the records of more than 30,000 law enforcement officers who lost their certifications were tracked. Of the more than 30,000 that lost their certifications, 4,500 plus lost those certifications because of drugs and alcohol. But just under that number, coming in around 3,300, is assault and domestic violence. Then you have theft, dishonesty, misconduct, things like that. Not only is this incredibly disturbing for those abused at the hands of law enforcement officers, it's disturbing for the public and for the officers themselves. Think about how the good cops feel about those statistics. We have a very serious problem on our hands, and it's called the thin blue line. Good cops should not protect bad cops, ever. But there is a culture inside policing where that's exactly what's expected of them. And until we, the public, demand more transparency in policing, the thin blue line will remain. It's up to us to demand more accountability and more punishment for cops who commit crimes. Until then, there will be many more Katrina Brown Lees out there. One more is too many. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Please hit the like button if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to support me. It helps so much. You can follow me on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, and I have 2 podcasts. This podcast is called Dining with Death. This is an archival series of the old YouTube episodes. And this podcast is called Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I post new episodes of this podcast every Monday and every Wednesday. Both the podcasts are on Apple and Spotify. If you would like, you can join my Patreon. Some of you give a few dollars a month to help keep the episodes coming. You can also join my fundraiser, and you do not have to be a part of Patreon to donate to the fundraiser. This is the thumbnail on my channel that explains all we are doing to raise money to donate to police departments trying to solve some cold cases. Once again, I want you to know how much each and every one of you means to me. The fact that you have so many choices to watch true crime, from network TV to YouTube, and you choose to spend a few minutes of your day with me, it's amazing to me. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.